The letter had no stamp, no return address. Just 3 words pressed into the corner like a dare. Bring the dog. Jack Maddox hadn't opened his mailbox in weeks. Nothing came anymore. No bills, no junk ads. Not since he retired from the Navy and moved out to the edge of nowhere with Ranger, his old K-9 partner. But this morning, that red flag on the box was up. Inside was a single envelope, thick and crisp, military-grade paper. The name printed on it was his. But the handwriting, cursive, exact, with an old-school slant, felt hauntingly familiar. And what stopped him cold? It knew Ranger's name. Subscribe now to follow this chilling mystery. You won't believe what the dog remembers. Jack stood on the porch for a long time, turning the envelope over in his hand. Ranger sat beside him, ears perked, tail twitching like he could sense something wrong too. "Should we open it, buddy?" Jack muttered. The dog didn't bark, just stared straight ahead toward the woods, like he already knew what was coming. Jack tore the seal and unfolded the letter. To John W. Maddox from Estate of Cassandra Maddox. Per the terms of inheritance, you have been granted full possession of the floating residence at Mirror Lake, Oregon. Coordinates enclosed. Immediate retrieval advised. Bring the dog. Do not attempt to enter without him. Jack's throat tightened. Cassandra Maddox? That name hadn't crossed his mind in decades. Not since the accident. Not since his kid sister was swept away during a relocation storm back in '73, when their family had moved to a base outside Charleston. But her name was right there. Her signature, shaky, aged, but unmistakable, curled at the bottom of the page. She was supposed to have died when she was 9. Jack sat down slowly, staring at the coordinates. Mirror Lake. The place didn't ring a bell, but there it was, etched onto the letter in precision, like a ghost had drawn a map for him. Ranger whimpered. Jack looked down. The dog was nudging the corner of the envelope with his snout. He blinked. There, faintly, almost invisible unless the light hit just right, was another sentence. Handwritten in ink that looked like it was fading fast. Don't come alone. That night, Jack didn't sleep. He stayed up replaying memories he'd buried for 40 years. Cassandra in her tiny uniform jacket, clinging to her stuffed bear. The base sirens blaring during the evacuation. The muddy waters rising too fast. His mother screaming. They never found her body. Maybe she didn't drown, Jack whispered, pouring himself a whiskey. Maybe they found her. He didn't finish that thought. By morning, he'd packed up the truck. Food, gear, a tent, a pistol he hadn't touched in years. And Ranger, pacing by the door like he already knew it wasn't just another camping trip. The drive was long, 2 states over, and the last 10 miles were dirt roads so narrow Jack had to fold in the mirrors to keep from scraping the trees. And then he saw it. A lake so still it looked like glass. Not a single boat, no fish, no birdsong. And out there, tethered to nothing, was a house. A full-size wooden home, floating silent and perfect in the middle of Mirror Lake. It looked new. Windows intact, porch lights unbroken, curtains drawn. But there was no power line, no generator hum, no dock. Just a rowboat waiting for him, as if someone had known the exact day he'd show up. Jack stood on the shore, one boot in the mud, one hand resting on Ranger's collar. "You seeing this too?" he whispered. The dog didn't move. His muscles were taut, tail straight, eyes locked on the house like he was staring down a memory. Jack rowed them out in silence. The water didn't move, not even with the oars, like it wasn't water at all, but a mirror holding something in. When they reached the porch, Jack tied the rope to a metal ring screwed into the boards. There was no lock on the front door. He pushed it open. The air inside smelled like cedar and salt, like it had been sealed for years or never opened at all. Everything was perfectly in place. A dining table set for 2, a coat on the rack by the door, a dusty radio tuned to a dead station, crackling faintly. Jack reached for the light switch and laughed. Of course, no power. He turned toward Ranger. The dog stood at the threshold, growling low and steady. "What is it, boy?" Ranger crept forward, nose close to the floor. He made a slow circle in the middle of the living room, then stopped at a spot between the rug and the bookshelf. His paw tapped the floor once, twice, then scratched. Jack knelt and lifted the rug. Beneath it was a metal handle. Some houses have crawl spaces. This one had a trapdoor. And Jack was about to find out what should have stayed buried beneath the waterline. Jack stared at the metal handle embedded in the floor. It was flush with the wood, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. No dust, no signs of age. which meant somebody had been here recently. Ranger sat beside him, alert but silent, tail low and ears locked forward. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Jack muttered. He took a breath, reached down and pulled. The trapdoor creaked open, not with resistance but with a kind of ease that made his skin crawl. It opened too smoothly, too quietly. Beneath was a narrow shaft with a steel ladder descending into darkness. No light, no sound. Just a waft of cool, sterile air rising up like it came from a freezer or a lab. Jack clicked on his flashlight and aimed it downward. Metal walls, bolted panels, a narrow corridor below, maybe 10 feet down. This wasn't a basement. It was a bunker. He debated leaving. Every inch of his gut said turn back, row away, torch the house. But Ranger had already moved. The dog had stepped forward, one paw on the top rung of the ladder, looking at Jack like, "You coming or not?" So Jack went. The steel rungs were cold and the smell intensified as he climbed, somewhere between antiseptic and mold. Ranger followed like a shadow, paws thudding softly behind him. When Jack reached the bottom, he froze. The bunker wasn't empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed to life as motion sensors clicked. He was standing in a long hallway, about 20 feet underground, lined with metal doors on each side. Most had codes or padlocks. The last door at the far end stood slightly ajar. He stepped toward it cautiously. Inside was a small control room. Outdated tech, CRT monitors, switchboards, reels of magnetic tape. A single desk faced the wall of screens. A rotary phone sat beside it, its cord wrapped neatly. The walls were plastered with maps, photos, and something that stopped him cold. A list of names. Dozens of them, printed and pinned to a corkboard. Some had red X's through them. Others had dates. One near the bottom said, Maddox, Cassandra, active, echo status, red. Jack stepped back like he'd been punched. She was listed, not deceased, active. Behind him, Ranger growled low. Not at Jack, at something near the desk. Jack followed his gaze and spotted a locked footlocker under the console. The lid had one word stenciled on it in black. Ekiyo. Jack dropped to one knee. He checked the padlock. Old school, combination style. No scratches, no wear. It hadn't been opened in years. Then Ranger barked. Not loud, but with that clipped, urgent edge that meant now. Jack spun around, heart thudding. There on one of the monitors, a fuzzy black and white feed blinked to life. The image was of a different room. Cement walls, 2 chairs, a folding table, one overhead light, sitting at the table. Jack's knees buckled. It was him. Younger, maybe mid-30s, wearing the old Navy issue, sitting at the table silent. Across from him sat a woman. Same age, dark hair pulled tight, sharp eyes. Cassandra. And between them was a dog. Jack reached for the VCR slot below the monitor. There was already a tape inside. He hit rewind. The machine whirred, clicked, then stopped. He pressed play. The woman spoke first. Subject Echo 4A showing strong neural imprinting. Handler recognition confirmed. Jack, his younger self, nodded once but didn't speak. The woman pointed to the dog. Give the command. Jack on screen looked directly into the dog's eyes and said one word. Remember. The dog sat upright instantly, ears alert. And Jack swore. The movement, the posture, the eyes, it was Ranger. Just younger. He hit pause. How the hell? Ranger padded to the screen, sat quietly, staring at his own younger self. His tail didn't wag. His body didn't twitch. He just watched. Like he remembered. Jack stepped away. He needed air. Something about the bunker felt wrong. Not just old, but unfinished. Like someone had packed up in a hurry and left too much behind. On the way out, he checked one of the other doors. Locked. Another had a keypad, but the buttons were worn down in a pattern, 372. He tried it. The door clicked. Inside was a cold storage unit. 3 shelves. Military-grade binders wrapped in plastic. Jack opened one. It was filled with behavioral tracking logs, all centered on K9 units. Every page had handler notes, neural scan readouts, response tests. And in the top corner of each page was a header. Project Echo Ghost property of DoD were classified. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But whatever Echo Ghost was, it had started with the dogs. And it hadn't ended. Back in the main hall, Jack stopped at a mirror mounted above the ladder exit. There was something written across it in faded Sharpie. The dog remembers what we made you forget. He stared at his reflection, then at Ranger. Who were we? Jack whispered. And what the hell did they do to you? As he climbed back into the house, the trapdoor sealed quietly behind them. Jack didn't touch anything else that night. He didn't eat, didn't unpack. He just sat in the dark with Ranger lying at his feet, both of them listening to the silence outside. But somewhere, deep beneath the water, the signal kept running. Jack barely slept. He sat in the dim living room of the floating house, the small flashlight flickering on the coffee table, while the lake outside remained eerily motionless. There was no breeze, no birds, not even the distant sound of insects. Just silence, like the world around them was holding its breath. Ranger lay curled near the front door, but he wasn't resting. The dog's eyes were half open, ears twitching at sounds Jack couldn't hear. Every few minutes, Ranger would lift his head and stare toward the trapdoor beneath the rug, like something down there was calling. Jack rubbed his face, wishing for another strong cup of coffee or bourbon, but neither seemed like a good idea if he needed a clear head. Whatever happened here, I wasn't supposed to find it, he whispered. Ranger didn't move, but his tail thumped once as if to answer. By morning, Jack had made up his mind. He needed proof, not just speculation and old tapes. Something physical, something he could take to someone he trusted. But that was the problem. He no longer trusted anyone. He knelt beside Ranger and ruffled his fur. You ready, partner? Ranger stood immediately, like he'd been waiting for the words all night. Jack pulled the rug back and opened the trapdoor again. The cool underground smell rushed up to meet them, and Ranger descended first without hesitation, like he was returning to a place he already knew. Jack followed, but instead of going straight to the control room, he decided to explore the doors he hadn't checked yet. The hallway lights hummed on automatically. Dust particles floated through the beams like falling snow. Ranger stopped halfway down the corridor, nose pressed against a steel panel on the left, one with no lock, no label, and no keypad. Just a single black strip near the top. Looks like some kind of magnetic lock, Jack murmured. Ranger tapped the door with his paw. Nothing. Jack placed his hand on the strip. Still nothing. He was about to move on when Ranger suddenly barked, sharp and focused, then dug his claws frantically at a corner of the door, like he was trying to pry it open. Jack pulled him back gently. Hey, slow down. What are you trying to tell me? Ranger stepped aside, staring intently at the strip again. Jack swallowed. Was it scanning? He leaned closer. Ranger stepped too, nose nearly touching the metal. Click. The door slid open. Jack froze. How the hell? He whispered. Did it recognize Ranger? Inside the room was a long stainless steel table with items neatly arranged, each tagged and sealed. Not random items, personal items, belongings. Jack scanned the labels. Lieutenant Howard Miller, tag 0-21. Captain Elise Monroe, tag 0-14. Sergeant Reed Hanlon, tag 0-32. Maddox Cassandra, tag 0-7. Jack felt a knot twist in his stomach. He opened Cassandra's box slowly. Inside was a small silver necklace with a blue stone, a folded piece of notebook paper, a plastic key card, and a photograph. Not a military photo, a family photo. Cassandra, maybe 10 years old, smiling at the camera with messy bangs, holding a puppy that looked shockingly like Ranger. Jack was in the photo too, behind her, arms draped over her shoulders. He didn't remember the moment it was taken. His hands started shaking as he unfolded the notebook page. It contained just one sentence. They didn't take me. I volunteered. Find the others. Ranger nudged the plastic key card, pushing it toward Jack. The card had one word printed on it. Lab 4. Jack now had a destination. They continued down the hall until they reached a blast door-style entrance with a card slot on the left wall. A red indicator light flashed steadily beside it. Jack swiped the card. The light turned green. With a hydraulic hiss, the door slid open. Inside was a room colder than the rest. Frost coated the far wall. Shelves filled with insulated canisters lined the space, each marked with strings of alphanumeric ID codes. Jack approached slowly. A monitor flickered awake overhead with a blue government-style interface. Lines of text scrolled before stopping. Authorized entry, Echo Cartography, Phase 3. Warning, biohybrid memory anchoring test site. Access restricted. Jack's head spun. Memory anchoring? Echo cartography? Biohybrid? Ranger stood stiff-legged, staring at a panel on the back wall. He approached it cautiously, nose low, sniffing the metal. Suddenly, a loud mechanical thud echoed through the bunker. The floor vibrated slightly. Jack grabbed Ranger by the collar. What was that? Someone else here. He moved cautiously back into the hallway. But then he noticed something that hadn't been there before. At the far end of the hall, a small security monitor built into the corner ceiling was now powered on. The screen showed an angle outside the floating house, and on the shoreline, barely visible in the mist, a figure was standing there, watching the house, not moving. The camera zoomed automatically. The figure seemed to be wearing a hooded raincoat and holding something long, maybe a cane or a rifle. Jack's pulse hammered through his skull. Ranger growled with a deep primal sound that Jack hadn't heard since war zones overseas. We're not alone, Jack whispered. He had one choice: go up there and confront whoever was watching, or stay underground and learn more before making a move. He turned back toward the hall, and that was when the bunker lights flickered. Once, twice, then shut off completely, plunging them into pitch black. Ranger pressed against Jack's leg, breathing hard but not panicking. From somewhere deeper in the bunker, a metal door began to open, not the one they entered, one that neither of them had unlocked. For a moment there was nothing, just darkness, stillness, cold. Then Jack felt it, Ranger's shoulder pressing against his leg in the pitch black of the underground hall. The dog's breath was warm, steady. Jack reached down, found Ranger's collar, and whispered, "Stay close." A low metallic groan echoed from deeper inside the bunker. Not mechanical, not routine. This was something being forced open, something that hadn't moved in a long time. Jack reached for the flashlight on his belt and flicked it on. It stuttered to life, dim, flickering, but enough to see. The hallway was empty behind them, but the far end, a door that had been sealed earlier, now stood cracked open. Not wide, just enough to say someone or something had just passed through. Jack exhaled slowly. I really should have burned this place down. Ranger's hackles rose. His body went stiff. Then without warning, he bolted ahead. No barking, just a silent sprint down the hall toward the open door. Ranger, Jack hissed, running after him. The room beyond the open door was different. Unlike the sterile bunker halls, this one was lined with old wood paneling, faded wallpaper, and a thick layer of dust. It didn't belong underground at all. It looked like it had been copied from a living room straight out of 1978. There was a couch, a TV set, a glass ashtray on a coffee table, a rotary phone with the cord wrapped neatly. It felt like stepping into a preserved memory. And Ranger was frozen in the center of it, staring at the TV screen, which was flickering. Without power, without signal, just static. Then abruptly the screen blinked. A grainy image formed, a military hospital room. The camera angle was fixed high in a corner, as if it had been installed covertly. The feed looked old, maybe from the early 2000s. There were two people in the frame, a man in a hospital bed, pale, unconscious, and a woman in uniform sitting beside him, holding his hand. Jack took a step forward, squinting. The man in the bed, it was him. He stared in disbelief. Same jawline, same scar above the left eyebrow. But he was younger, hooked up to machines, motionless. And the woman, she leaned forward, speaking softly to the unconscious Jack. Jack couldn't hear the audio, but he could read her lips. They told me you volunteered, but I know you didn't. I'm so sorry, Jack. He whispered her name aloud. Cassandra. The screen blinked again, static. Then a new video began. This one shot from a handheld camcorder, shaky and disjointed. A younger version of Cassandra was in some kind of training room, surrounded by chalkboards covered in notes and diagrams. She was talking fast, panicked, to someone off screen. The signal is mapping memory through scent. It's not just associative, it's anchoring. She held up a clear vial with liquid inside. They're testing dogs first because the hippocampus is easier to overwrite. But the handlers, she stopped, looked into the lens. If you're watching this, it means the system failed. They made you forget, but the dogs didn't. The dogs can't. The feed cut. Jack turned to Ranger, who now sat calmly, watching the screen fade to black. His ears drooped. His breathing was steady, slow. Jack knelt beside him. They used you. Ranger blinked. Jack's voice cracked. They used both of us. Back in the main hallway, the lights had come back on. But Jack didn't trust them. Something had triggered that power loss. And something, or someone, was trying to send him a message. He headed back upstairs with Ranger at his heels. When Jack stepped back into the floating house, the temperature felt warmer. The light filtering in from the windows had shifted. Afternoon sun now slanted across the floorboards. But something was off. The radio in the corner, long dead, was now hissing. Not music, not news, just soft static. Jack crossed the room slowly. He reached toward the dial, then froze. Because the static was being interrupted. With whispers. True dog. Watch. Memory. Still alive. Ranger. Maddox. The words came scattered, disjointed, like pieces of a sentence broken apart by water. He yanked the plug, but the radio kept playing for 3 seconds longer, then shut off with a high-pitched squeal. Ranger growled. Outside the window across the lake, the figure was gone. Jack locked the doors. He didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in psychics or curses, but this wasn't supernatural. This was designed, engineered, tactical. Someone had built this place to trap memories, to control what people remembered and what they didn't. And Ranger? He hadn't just been a bomb-sniffing dog. He had been a living archive. And maybe, just maybe, the last surviving piece of a program meant to rewrite history. That night the storm came. Not rain, not thunder, just wind, hard and howling across the lake, pushing waves against the house for the first time since Jack arrived. It creaked and groaned as if it remembered too. Jack sat on the couch with Ranger curled beside him, both of them staring at the door. And from somewhere underneath them, the sound of tapping came again. 1, 2, 3 slow knocks from below, like someone wanted back in. Don't miss part 5, where Jack learns the truth about Project Echo Ghost and the woman who sacrificed everything to keep him alive. Subscribe now and follow the signal before it goes silent forever. The knocking came again. 3 taps, slow, deliberate, beneath the floorboards. Jack held his breath. His hand rested on Ranger's back, feeling every tense muscle in the dog's body. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't move. He just stared at the floor like he was waiting for something he didn't want to see. Jack reached for the old pistol he kept in his bag. It wasn't much, a .38 he'd carried since his first deployment, but it had never failed him. He moved toward the trapdoor, slowly, every board creaking louder than it should have in the windless quiet. The storm outside had passed. No rain, no thunder, just stillness again, like the lake had exhaled and left a vacuum behind. Jack lifted the trapdoor. No one was there, but the air had changed. The sterile, metallic chill from the bunker was gone. Now it smelled like wet earth, old cedar, and tobacco. Ranger growled and stepped forward without hesitation. Jack followed. Back in the bunker, every light was out, not flickering, dead. But the emergency backup system had kicked in, casting a dull red glow through the hallway. Jack scanned the corridor. The living room replica door was shut again, even though he'd left it open. He moved slowly. Ranger stayed close, ears pinned back. Jack was halfway to the end of the hall when he heard something. A footstep. Not his, not Ranger's. Another. Someone was down here. He raised the pistol. Who's there? No answer. Then from the far end of the hall, a voice answered. Not loud, not aggressive, just calm. You shouldn't have come alone. Jack stiffened. That voice, it was the same one from the closet phone on the first day. He stepped toward the sound. Who are you? I'm the reason the signal hasn't spread. The voice came from behind one of the sealed doors. Door number 6, the one that had no handle. Now it stood open. Inside was a narrow chamber lit by a single lamp. A man sat on a folding chair in the corner, wearing a soaked canvas raincoat. The hood hung low over his face, shadowing everything but his mouth. He held a cane across his knees, not decorative, functional. You're Maddox, he said flatly. The brother. Jack nodded, still aiming the gun. You knew Cassandra? Jack asked. The man nodded slowly. I helped her build this place. Jack took a breath. Is she alive? A pause. No. Jack lowered the gun. Tell me everything. The man tapped the cane once against the floor. You think this was just a memory project? Echo Ghost was bigger than that. They weren't just tracking memories. They were weaponizing loyalty, using dogs to encode experiences, then transferring them into other soldiers. Jack's throat tightened. Like transplanting trauma, he asked. The man nodded. They figured out how to bind neural patterns into scent and sound. Ranger wasn't just your partner. He was your recorder, your filter. You weren't supposed to remember the worst parts. He absorbed them. Jack stepped back, as if the words were radiation. But why? Because if soldiers forgot how bad it really was, they'd volunteer again. The man stood slowly, wincing as he leaned on the cane. Cassandra found out. She was part of Phase 1. After her accident, they enrolled her into covert development, gave her a new identity. She believed in the science until she saw what it did to people, what it did to you. Jack's hands trembled. So I was one of the test subjects? The man nodded. You were the most successful one. That's why Ranger was kept alive. He's the only Echo unit to survive disconnection. Jack looked at Ranger, who now stood near the doorway, calm and watchful. He remembers everything, doesn't he? Jack asked. Yes, and so do you. It's buried, but it's in there. Jack felt like the ground was shifting under him. He remembered flashbacks, flashes of gunfire, sand, screams, but they'd always seemed jumbled, incomplete. Now he knew why. Ranger had been carrying half the puzzle. Jack swallowed hard. Why now? Why bring me back here? Because the last surviving Echo server is inside this house, still active, and someone's coming to destroy it. You're the only one with biometric clearance left. A chill passed through Jack. They're going to bury this, he said. They always were, the man replied. But now they're desperate. Too many pieces are surfacing. Whistleblowers, failing memory barriers. Ranger's presence triggered old proximity signals. Jack exhaled. So how do we stop them? The man pulled something from his coat. A small black drive. This is everything. Cassandra backed it up before she died. I've been holding on to it, waiting for you to show up. Her last request. Jack took the drive, his hands still shaking. And what about you? The man chuckled. I'm already dead, far as the records show. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small dog tag and tossed it to the floor. It landed at Jack's feet. Engraved on it, Shooker Dalton Reyes, Echo Handler 01. Jack stared. Good luck, Maddox, the man said. This is bigger than memory now. And then he turned and walked back into the hallway, vanishing into the fog that had somehow crept inside the house. Back upstairs, Jack stood at the window. Morning mist had rolled in heavy, swallowing the lake. But on the far shore, he saw movement again. A black SUV, parked crooked near the trees, doors cracked, no one visible yet. They'd arrived. He turned to Ranger, who sat by the couch, waiting for his command like always. You ready to go to war again, boy? Jack whispered. Ranger's ears twitched. He stood, silent, loyal. Jack loaded the pistol, grabbed his bag, and tucked the drive into the inner pocket of his coat. The trapdoor creaked open one last time. This time they wouldn't be hiding in the bunker. They'd be defending it. Jack sealed the trapdoor behind them and pulled the heavy bolt shut. They were back underground, back inside the belly of a place built to forget. But this time, they weren't just exploring. They were preparing for war. The server room sat behind a thick steel door at the far end of the second corridor. Jack had bypassed it before, assuming it was sealed for good. Now, armed with the black drive from Sergeant Reyes and his own fingerprint, the system recognized him with a soft click and a blinking green light. Ranger stood beside him like a statue, unmoving, unblinking. Jack placed his hand on the panel. The door opened. Inside, the room buzzed with faint electrical hums. It was cold, even colder than the rest of the bunker. Deliberate to preserve the hardware. Dozens of towers stood humming quietly, stacked with hard drives, ports, and blinking lights that cast strange shadows across the walls. This wasn't just a data center. This was a living archive. A terminal at the center powered up automatically as Jack approached. The screen turned blue with the same DoD interface from earlier. Echo Ghost primary node status active. Warning, unauthorized presence detected. Jack inserted the black drive into the main slot. The warning disappeared. Another message appeared. Welcome, Cassandra Maddox, last access 11 years ago. Jack's breath hitched. Her voice echoed softly through the speaker system like a recorded farewell. Jack, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, but you're not, and neither is Ranger. You were never just a soldier. You were the proof they couldn't control, and he was the only thing they couldn't erase. The screen changed again, this time showing a map pulsing with red dots. Jack zoomed in. Dogs, dozens of them. Echo units still alive, still moving. Most were listed as inactive, but one remained bright. Eco 4A, active, location confirmed. Ranger. The last one. Jack stepped back, trying to process what it all meant. That's when Ranger growled. Jack spun around just in time to see a security feed come to life on the far wall. The screen showed 3 men, fully geared, tactical dress, night vision helmets, entering the cabin upstairs. They moved fast, clean, no hesitation. They knew the layout, and they weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here to delete. Jack turned back to the console. He needed time. He clicked into the server logs and initiated a backup dump of the entire system. Years of research, memory logs, handler data, and surveillance tapes, all compressed and encrypted onto the drive Reyes had given him. Estimated time 14 minutes. Jack swore under his breath. 14 minutes might as well be an hour. He grabbed a second flash drive from the terminal drawer and stuffed it in his jacket. "All right, buddy," he said, cocking the .38. "No more hiding." Ranger stood and trotted to the door. Jack killed the hallway lights and took up position behind a metal pillar halfway between the surveillance room and the trapdoor. He didn't have military-grade weapons, no grenades, no ARs, just the old revolver, his instincts, and Ranger. That had always been enough. Footsteps clanked on the ladder above. One voice muttered, "Thermal shows 2 heat signatures, 1 human, 1 K9. "They're down here," another said. Jack smirked. "Damn right we are." The first man dropped down and swept the hallway with a flashlight and silencer-equipped pistol. Jack waited until he passed the center column, then stepped out. One shot. The man collapsed without a sound. The second was faster. He fired, rounds ricocheting off the walls. Jack dove behind the pillar. That's when Ranger lunged. Silent, precise, brutal. The second man went down hard, throat pinned. The third hesitated at the top of the ladder. Bad move. Jack fired through the darkness. The third man crashed down the rungs like a bag of rocks. Silence returned. Jack breathed heavy, pistol still raised. The entire exchange had lasted less than 20 seconds, but his hands were shaking. He hadn't killed anyone in years. Ranger came back slowly, no blood on him, but his body taut with adrenaline. "Good boy," Jack whispered. "Damn good boy." Back in the server room, the screen blinked. "Backup complete. File secured." Jack pulled the drive. As he turned to leave, a final message popped up. "Do you wish to terminate node?" Jack paused. If he said yes, the evidence would be destroyed forever, but no one could ever misuse it again. If he said no, someone might try to replicate Echo Ghost. But then the screen flickered again, and Cassandra's voice returned, as if pre-recorded to match this moment. "Jack, the world doesn't need secrets. It needs choices. Give them that." Jack clicked no. He wouldn't play God. He'd expose the truth and let the world decide. They climbed out of the bunker just after sunrise. The lake glowed gold under the morning light. The fog burned off by dawn. Jack stood on the deck, Ranger beside him, both looking toward the horizon. In his coat pocket was a black flash drive containing one of the government's darkest secrets. Behind him was a house that had kept it hidden for over a decade. And somewhere out there, other Echo dogs might still be carrying the past inside them. Jack knelt beside Ranger. "You ready to go find the rest?" Ranger licked his hand once. It wasn't a yes. It was a mission accepted. They left Mirror Lake just before noon. Jack didn't look back. Not at the floating house, not at the bunker beneath it, not at the 3 bodies buried beneath the floorboards. Some things didn't deserve a funeral. He had the drive now. Everything Cassandra had hidden, everything Echo Ghost had tried to erase. The data was secure in the breast pocket of his canvas jacket, zipped tight next to his chest like a second heartbeat. Ranger rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue out, eyes always moving. The old Ford F-150 groaned beneath them, the tires spitting gravel as they pulled back onto the main road. They headed south toward a small town outside Eugene, Oregon, where the first Echo dog on the archive list had last pinged. The record dated back 6 years, but it was all Jack had to go on. Most of the other dots on the map were gone. Inactive. That could mean retired, or it could mean wiped. He wasn't taking chances. Jack pulled into a quiet roadside diner late afternoon, the kind of place with faded signs, screen doors that always squeaked, and a menu that hadn't changed since the 70s. He parked in the back, where the truck wouldn't be too visible from the road. Ranger hopped down and sniffed the air like a cop checking for threats. Inside, the place was half empty. Just a couple of truckers at the bar, and a waitress with a tired smile and a pencil behind her ear. Jack slid into a booth near the corner. Ranger curled under the table. When the waitress came over, Jack ordered a burger and a coffee. Nothing fancy. Something to feel normal again. She looked down at Ranger and smiled. "He a service dog?" Jack nodded. "Something like that. You guys military?" "Used to be." She nodded, tapping her notepad. "Well, he's welcome inside. I'll bring him a water bowl." Jack gave her a soft smile. "Appreciate it." While he waited, Jack pulled out the list Reyes had given him. He scanned the top names. Echo units that had been cataloged between 1999 and 2012. Most were classified by number, but a few had handler names attached. One of them made his heart skip. Echo 9C K9 Scout. Handler, Lil T. Sarah Monroe. Location last confirmed, Crescent County Shelter, Oregon, 2017. The name Monroe meant nothing, but Scout, that rang a bell. He closed his eyes. A dusty base in Kandahar, a woman laughing in a training yard, a golden retriever with a scar across his nose. Scout, he hadn't thought about that dog in years, but he remembered something now. Ranger and Scout were tested together once, both flagged for enhanced training, both sent to different units. Scout had a handler named Sarah, and now he might be alive. The waitress brought over the burger, fries, and a bowl of water for Ranger. The dog didn't touch the water. He was too busy watching the front door. Jack bit into the burger, barely tasting it. His mind was spinning. What would he find if Scout was still out there? Would the dog remember him? Would he react the way Ranger had? What if? Jack stopped mid-bite. A black SUV had pulled into the parking lot. No plates. Tires dusty. One man stepped out, civilian clothes but too clean, too pressed. Sunglasses that didn't match the weather. Ranger didn't bark, but he sat up fast. Jack slid the drive from his jacket and slipped it into the napkin holder. Then he stood and walked toward the restroom at the back of the diner, nodding to the waitress as he passed. "Be right back," he said. The back hallway was empty. Jack pushed open the window above the urinal and climbed through, landing in a crouch behind the dumpster out back. He pulled his sidearm, waited. 30 seconds later, the front door chimed. The man in sunglasses entered. Jack circled quietly behind the diner, keeping low, and peeked through the kitchen door. The man had approached his booth. He picked up the napkin holder, opened it. Nothing inside. His head snapped toward the kitchen. Too late. Jack stepped through the swinging door with the pistol raised. "Looking for something?" The man froze. "Easy," he said, holding his hands out. "Who sent you?" Jack asked. The man didn't answer. Jack fired a single round into the floor, close enough to leave a scorch mark. The waitress screamed from behind the counter. Ranger barked, low and furious. "Who sent you?" Jack repeated. This time the man spoke. "They're not after you anymore, Maddox." Jack narrowed his eyes. "Who then?" The man's jaw clenched. "They're cleaning house. Anyone who ever touched Echo. Dogs, handlers, developers, even civilian contractors. You're already dead on paper. But Scout, Monroe, they're still out there. That's why you're here, right?" Jack didn't answer. The man took a slow step forward. "You don't have much time. If I were you, I'd run." Jack raised the gun higher. "I'm not running anymore." The man sighed. "Then I guess we'll both be dead by morning." Jack let him walk out. Didn't follow. Didn't shoot. There was no point. This wasn't about intimidation. It was a warning. 10 minutes later, Jack and Ranger were back in the truck, headed east toward Crescent County. The road twisted through pine forests and low fog, headlights cutting through silver mist. Ranger leaned against the passenger seat, ears perked, eyes alert. "You remember Scout, don't you?" Jack asked. Ranger licked his lips, tail thumping once. Jack smiled. "Let's go find your old friend." The Crescent County Animal Shelter sat at the edge of an old logging town, tucked between forgotten pine roads and fog-drenched farmland. If you didn't know where to look, you'd miss it completely. Jack pulled into the gravel lot just before sunset. The building was small, white siding, a rusting flagpole out front, wind chimes hanging from the porch. There were no security cameras, no signs of surveillance. And still, Ranger wouldn't get out of the truck. He sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, eyes locked on the front door. Not tense, not scared. Just waiting. Jack reached over and scratched behind Ranger's ears. "You think he's in there, don't you?" Ranger thumped his tail once. That was enough. Inside, the place smelled of bleach and wet concrete. An older woman with short gray hair and reading glasses sat behind the desk, feeding treats to a one-eyed chihuahua. She looked up as Jack stepped inside. "Help you with something?" she asked. Jack nodded. "I'm looking for a dog that may have come through here a few years back. Name was Scout. Golden retriever. Scar on his nose." The woman raised an eyebrow. "We've had a lot of retrievers come through. This one was military," Jack added. "He would have been special. Had a handler named Sarah Monroe. Might have shown signs of advanced training." Her expression changed. She didn't smile, didn't speak. Just stood slowly and gestured toward the back. "Come with me." They walked down a narrow corridor lined with chain-link kennels. Most were empty. A few held old dogs, sleepy hounds, stiff-legged shepherds, one lab mix missing a paw. She stopped at the last kennel. There, lying on a thin blanket, was a golden retriever. His muzzle was white with age, his eyes cloudy, but the scar across his nose was unmistakable. Jack stepped closer. "Scout," he whispered. The dog lifted his head slowly, and then he stood. Shaky legs, tail low, eyes locked on Ranger, who had just padded quietly to Jack's side. For a long moment, neither dog moved. Then Scout stepped forward, pressing his nose to the gate. Ranger met him halfway. No barking, no growling. Just recognition. Two old warriors sharing something no one else could understand. The woman spoke quietly. "He showed up 5 years ago. No microchip, no tags. Just walked into town like he was on a mission. Slept outside the post office for 2 days before someone brought him here." Jack nodded. "And Sarah Monroe?" The woman hesitated. "She used to live nearby. Ranch about a mile up the road, but she passed away last year. Cancer." Jack looked away. Of course she was gone. No one from Echo ever got to retire peacefully. That night, Jack sat on the porch of Monroe's abandoned ranch, legs stretched out, whiskey in hand. The house had been empty a while, but it still felt lived in, like someone had only just stepped away. Scout lay in the grass, curled beside Ranger. They hadn't left each other's side since they reunited. The wind rustled through the trees. The stars were coming out, one by one. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out the flash drive. The archive. Everything Echo Ghost had done. Everything it had tried to hide. He had sent a copy to Reyes before leaving Mirror Lake. Another to a journalist he trusted from his Navy days. One more to a senator who owed him a favor. He wasn't a whistleblower. He was just done being silent. The next morning, Jack watched Scout limp slowly across the porch and drop beside Ranger. The two dogs basked in the early sunlight like it was the first real peace they'd had in years. Jack picked up the framed photo from Monroe's dusty shelf. Sarah, younger, smiling with Scout at her feet. He placed it back down gently, then looked at the dogs. "You two still got one more mission in you?" Ranger lifted his head. Scout blinked slowly. "I thought so," Jack said, grabbing his coat. They left Crescent County an hour later, the truck rolling south down empty roads. No GPS, no plan. Just a man and two aging dogs, one of them carrying a buried past, the other proving that even the worst memories couldn't erase loyalty. Jack didn't know where they were headed, but he knew why. There were more Echo dogs out there, and the world needed to remember them. Thank you for following Jack and Ranger's journey through The House That Shouldn't Float. Stories like this aren't just about conspiracies and secrets. They're about memory, trust, and the bonds that never break, even when the world tries to erase them. What would you do if your dog remembered something the government tried to make you forget? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe now for more emotional and unforgettable tales from the edge of truth.